be at rest. Nobody ATM, it was a man who was singing while he was washing. If I had wings, I could fly, will fly. And the neighbor passed by and said, but if you had a wing, you would not have been a dove, you would have been a popo. But nevertheless, the man, he was joyful. He was joyful. If he had a wing like a dove, he would fly and be at rest. Brothers and sisters, the truth is, sometimes we can feel that way. When our brain is overrun, is hijacked by the traumas that we have been through. Sometimes it seems as though we are done at the last straw. I don't know if you felt that way before, but I felt that way before. The psalmist is feeling that way, and he says, oh, if I had wings like a dove. I can imagine that he stopped and he considered his son raping his daughter, and his son plotting and murdering that son, and his adulterous life, and when he sent that Uriah to be murdered, and when he stopped to recollect all of that, and how he killed his 10,000s. I would imagine that trauma racked his soul. He lay there in bed saying, oh, if I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. And not just to fly away and be at rest. This is what he says. Observe the next verse. He says, lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness. So he wants to go there and stay there so that he can get a peace of mind. You see, this is human experience. And the Bible is written in human experience. It could have been written in psychological experience. It could have been written in biological experience. But God chose human experience because he knows that you have to go through some of those things. And he wants you to stand when you go through some of those things. He wants you to be able to stand. And so he's giving you the foundation to stand, which is the Word of God. That is why it is so important to spend time studying, reading the Word of God, reading the experiences of these men. And as you read their experiences, you can grow. You would not ask, well, why me, Lord? Why did you send that wrong question? Wrong question. Anytime you think about asking why, wrong question. What would you have me to do, Lord, in this situation? What would you have me to see in this experience? Or what would you have me to help others? How can I help others in this experience? But why me, Lord? And keeping up a pity party for yourself is not the answer. That's not the answer. And God is teaching us it's not the answer. Let's go back to our lesson. You would recognize that the psychologists, they look at these three childhood traumas. Anyone or child that goes through abuse will carry traumas. If the child goes through abuse before age 5, the child may not be able to make any recollection. And then is sent before a psychologist, and he would not even know what is wrong. Because remember that the limbic system, it kicks in, the very same emotional system, that kicks in at age 11 months, before the child was born. And if the mother had gone through a terrible ordeal during pregnancy, then of course it affects the child. It affects the child. Are you familiar with it? It affects the child. And so abuse is one of the things. Whether it be physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the abuse, if the child goes through that, that is an ace. That is one ace already that the child has that doesn't give him or her a fighting chance in life. reasons why we are the ones who are supposed to protect our children is simply because if they get a number of ACEs, life becomes tough for them. Life becomes very difficult to handle. So abuse is one. Then secondly, you have neglect. Sometimes we can be right there with them and neglect them. Think about it. Sometimes our parents, they're crying out because of loneliness. They've grown old now. And they're right there in the house with us now. But they long for that touch. They long for the compassionate words. And if they're not getting that, they're neglected. Are we still together? And sometimes emotionally we are there. Physically we are there. But emotionally we are not there because we are dealing with our own demons. We are dealing with our own traumas. So even though we may be there in person, we are not connecting with them psychologically or emotionally. We are not connecting with them. And therefore, we are there, but we are lonely. And that has been the cry of many housewives and many older folks and many children. Yeah. And so neglect is another one. Abandonment is one that they hardly ever get over. And that is why you would notice that you can take a nice child and adopt that child, and that child seems as though, even though he was adopted by you and they give him the best of treatment, that child would seem as though he is disturbed still. There's a reason for that. Because that child cannot make connection with perhaps genuine, or their parents, they cannot make that connection. And as a result, it creates a shattered glass. It's like they watching their faces in a shattered glass. And they cannot make connection. And so you say, I take that boy from 3 months and I mind that boy until 20 years old. And that is the kind of chance he will give me. But the child was abandoned. The child was traumatized. And you don't take that into consideration. And why? Because you don't know anything about that. All you know is that the Children's Authority says that you should take that child. And you take that child and you do your best. You rock that child from cradle, only to recognize that is what you get. And simply because that child has been traumatized. And it tells us that we ought to look out for one another. And perhaps if you didn't know, now you know. Of course, you try to help individuals who have been abandoned. And so the first 3 things that any good psychologist will look for is this. We call it ANA: abuse, neglect, abandonment. Those are the 3 that affect any child. And it affects the child to the extent that the child sometimes think about giving up. And the presence of us, the brothers, we are happy to have you. And thank you for coming out. And I will just reiterate at this point so that they will benefit of the both of them, so that they will also follow along with us. I stopped off at abuse, neglect, and abandonment. And I was saying that these are the 3 key areas that you look for in a child. If a child has been abused, if a child has been neglected, if a child has been abandoned, it's difficult to pull that child together. Yes, you may adopt that child, take that child home as a baby, and shake that child from 2-3 months. And then when that child grows to 2021, that child begins to give you a whole lot of problems. It is possibly, it could be an abandonment problem. That is who you are dealing with. Because even though you may have adopted a child, give that child everything. The very fact that the child knows that he or she has been adopted and he or she has been abandoned by parent, that child comes as though he's looking at his face in a shattered mirror. He's not the same. He's not the same like any ordinary child. And so he's a child that you have to work closely with. There is success, yes, in raising such a child, but you have to work closely with that child. So you look for Anna, which is abuse, whether it be physical, sexual, you name it, emotional abuse, you look for that. We're talking about childhood traumas. You look for neglect, and neglect, I was sharing with the rest of the folks, you are there in the home with the individuals, your grandparents, they are there in the home, but the long for that touch, the long for that assurance, the long for folks to talk with them, that is emotionally they want to make connection with people. And I know it as a pastor because the moment I go visitation and the old lady wants to talk, I know what she's looking for is not so much, yes, she wants me to share the word of God, but she wants to connect. And so she will begin to tell me all of her past, everything that ever happened. And why? Because she has been neglected. Most of the brethren, most of the people who are neglected, whether they be old or young, you would find that they are looking for emotional attachment. And then, well, of course, abandonment. I share that with you. So whenever you're looking at a child and childhood traumas, these are the three areas of importance. We call it ANA, which is abuse, neglect, and abandonment. Now, there are some individuals who use what we call trauma blocking. Let me go back. There are some things that I missed this morning, and I took it out because in the interest of time, I took it out. Let me go right back there. Right. We need to note this. We call it childhood attachment theory. In the 50s, that theory was very important, childhood attachment. And this is very important if you're thinking in terms of marriage. Stop all that you're doing and listen here now to this. All right? This four-part theory, if a child is content, ready, that child will be ready to learn, engage with tasks, can be independent, and seek out caregiver for comfort. So that child, you raise that child, and when the child cries for attention, you give the child the attention. And you soothe the feelings of that child. What happens is that child becomes secure. Because the world of that child is secure. And that child feels somewhat, secure through life. And as that child grows, that child is not dependent on people and things in order to see them through. They are secure in their skin. They are secure in their skin. And that is how we ought to grow our children. They ought to feel